Imagine waking up to find dozens of strangers camping on your private land, tents, bonfires, and an entire HOA party in full swing. Sounds insane, right? But that's exactly what happened when Karen decided my property was the perfect spot for a community retreat. She thought she could get away with it, until my guard dogs showed up. That morning started like any other: cool air, the soft chirping of birds, and the kind of quiet that made my land feel like a personal sanctuary. I had worked hard for this place, a few acres of untouched wilderness where I could live on my own terms, free from nosy neighbors and pointless HOA drama. Or so I thought, because as I stepped out onto my porch, stretching and sipping my coffee, I spotted something that made my blood run cold. A long line of cars, SUVs, minivans, and even a couple of RVs was snaking its way down my private dirt road. Dust billowed up behind them as they crawled toward my land like an invading army. At first, I thought maybe I was still half asleep. Maybe I was imagining things. But as I rubbed my eyes and focused, the reality hit me like a freight train. These people were setting up camp. A group of teenagers hopped out of a car, unfolding camping chairs like they were about to roast marshmallows. A man in cargo shorts dragged a cooler toward the clearing near my pond. And worst of all, someone was hammering stakes into the ground, planting tents all over my property. I set my coffee down slowly, took a deep breath, and clenched my fists. This had Karen written all over it. And just as I thought that, there she was, marching toward me like she owned the place, clipboard in hand, a smug grin plastered across her face. "Morning, neighbor," she chirped, as if she hadn't just unleashed an entire illegal camping retreat onto my land. I didn't respond. I just crossed my arms and waited for the nonsense to start. Karen cleared her throat, holding up her clipboard like it was some kind of sacred decree. "I just wanted to personally thank you for your generous donation to the HOA community camping weekend." I blinked. "My what?" Karen let out a little laugh, waving a hand. "Oh, don't be so modest. The HOA and I agreed that your land is perfect for this year's event, so we took the liberty of setting everything up. Isn't it wonderful?" I stared at her, completely dumbfounded. "You took the liberty? Karen, this is my land. You and these people are trespassing." Her smile faltered for just a second before she plastered it right back on. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's just one weekend. You weren't using it for anything important." My eye twitched. "Not using it for anything important." I took a slow, calming breath before speaking again. "Karen, let me make this very clear. I'm not part of the HOA, I never was, and your event is happening on private property. You need to pack up and leave. Now." Karen scoffed, rolling her eyes like I was the unreasonable one. "Oh, don't be such a grump. The neighborhood voted on this and we all agreed that it was a great idea." I stared at her in disbelief. "You think you can vote to take over my land?" Karen smirked. "Well, we live in a democracy, don't we?" I clenched my jaw. This woman was actually insane. Before I could say another word, a voice shrieked from across the field. "You, Oa, there's poop everywhere." A teenage girl was hopping on one foot, her sneaker now covered in something very unpleasant. Her mother gasped. "Wait, you mean this isn't a maintained campsite?" A man in a Hawaiian shirt sniffed the air and groaned. "What's that smell?" I nearly laughed. This wasn't some polished, tourist-friendly campground. This was raw land. It had everything: mud, manure, snakes, and the occasional skunk. And the campers were just now realizing that. Karen, however, wasn't backing down. "It's fine," she huffed. "We already planned everything. People took time off work. It's too late to cancel." I folded my arms. "Not my problem." She glared at me like I had just personally ruined her birthday. "Well, if you're going to be so selfish about it, maybe we should put it to a vote." I stared at her. "A vote? You seriously think you can vote to steal my land?" Karen lifted her chin. "It's about community spirit. You wouldn't want to be an outcast, would you?" I took a step closer, lowering my voice just enough for her to hear. "All right, Karen, if you want to play that game, let me introduce you to my security team." Karen's smug expression flickered. "What do you mean?" I pulled out my phone, dialed a single number, and put it to my ear. "It's time." Then I hung up. Karen frowned. "Time for?" A deep, guttural growl rumbled from behind my barn, and then they appeared. My guard dogs, 6 massive, sleek-coated beasts, emerged, their powerful muscles rippling under the sun. Their sharp eyes scanned the trespassers like they were prey. Titan, my Belgian Malinois, stepped forward first. His ears were perked, his teeth barely visible as he let out a slow, menacing growl. A man holding a bag of marshmallows dropped them. A woman gasped. Are those friendly?" I smirked. "Depends." Titan let out one sharp, commanding bark. Karen's face turned ghost white. You can't just..." I folded my arms. "Oh, but you can bring 100 people onto my land." The crowd was starting to panic. People were backing away from their tents, their eyes darting between the massive dogs and the very obvious lack of fences or gates keeping them in check. Karen's voice was shaking. I'm calling the police," I chuckled, pulling my phone back out. "Go ahead." And right on cue, 2 squad cars rolled up. Karen's jaw dropped. That's when she realized she had just lost. But the story was far from over. Karen's face turned redder than a stop sign as she gawked at the squad cars pulling onto my land. The police officers stepped out, their hands resting casually on their belts, scanning the scene with unimpressed expressions. The campers who had been confidently setting up now looked nervous. Some of them had already started shoving their belongings back into their cars. Karen, however, wasn't backing down. She squared her shoulders, straightened her posture, and stomped toward the officers like she was about to file a noise complaint at a PTA meeting. "Thank goodness you're here, officers," she called out, flipping through her clipboard. "This man has released dangerous animals on innocent families. We were just trying to enjoy a peaceful community retreat, and he's threatening us." One of the officers, a tall man with a mustache that looked like it had seen more action than most war veterans, gave her a long, unimpressed look. Then he turned to me. "Sir, you called about trespassers." I nodded. "Yep. These people are camping on my private land without permission. The HOA had zero authority to set this up, and now I've got 100 people treating my property like it's a public park." Karen scoffed. "Oh, please. We're neighbors. This land should be shared with the community. He's being difficult for no reason." The other officer, a woman with sharp eyes and a clipboard of her own, glanced between me and Karen before asking, "Ma'am, you have written permission to be here?" Karen's confidence faltered for the first time. "Well, I mean, the HOA agreed that." "That's not what I asked," the officer cut in. "Do you have written permission from the owner?" Karen opened and closed her mouth like a fish out of water. The campers, who had been murmuring among themselves, were now very interested in Karen's answer. The officer sighed, clearly losing patience. She turned back to me. "Do you have proof this is your property?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked over to my truck, reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a neatly organized folder. I handed it to the officer, who flipped through it with practiced efficiency. "Land registered in your name," she muttered, scanning the paperwork. "No HOA involvement, no shared community spaces." She snapped the folder shut and turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, you and everyone else here are trespassing." A heavy silence settled over the crowd. Karen's face twisted with anger. That can't be right. He's part of the neighborhood." "That means the HOA has jurisdiction." The officer raised an eyebrow. "That's not how property laws work. The HOA only governs members who have agreed to their rules. This man is not a member. You have no authority here." Karen looked like she was about to have an actual meltdown. "But we planned this for months," she wailed. "People took time off work. We printed schedules and everything." The officer's patience was visibly thinning. "Ma'am, that's not his problem. You can't just take over someone's land because it's convenient for you." Before Karen could argue further, a loud, guttural growl cut through the tension. Titan, my biggest and most intimidating dog, had stepped forward. His massive frame cast a shadow over the ground. His ears were perked, his dark eyes locked on Karen with an expression that almost seemed to say, "I dare you to keep talking." Karen let out a strangled noise and scrambled backward, nearly tripping over her own feet. "Why you need to get rid of those beasts?" she screeched. I smirked. "They're on my land, unlike you. They have permission to be here." The officer fought back a chuckle but quickly regained his serious demeanor. He turned to the crowd. "All right, folks, you've got 10 minutes to pack up and clear out. If you're still here after that, we'll start issuing citations for trespassing." A ripple of panic spread through the campers. People started grabbing their belongings in a frenzy, stuffing tents into bags, dragging coolers back to their vehicles. A few grumbled about how they didn't even get to roast marshmallows, but no one dared argue with the police. Karen, however, wasn't ready to give up. She rounded on me, her face red with frustration. "This isn't over. You're ruining a community event. You're making yourself the enemy of your own neighborhood, I shrugged. I don't care about the neighborhood, Karen. I care about my land. And next time, if you or anyone else tries this again, my dogs won't just be standing around. Her face paled. Why you wouldn't dare? I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough so that only she could hear. Try me. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her jaw clenched as she realized she had lost. With one final death glare, she stomped off toward her car, slamming the door so hard the whole vehicle shook. I watched as the last few stragglers loaded up their stuff, throwing cautious glances at my dogs, who were still standing in formation. Titan let out one final, sharp bark. That was enough to send the remaining campers sprinting to their cars. The officers waited until the last vehicle had driven off before turning back to me. The mustached officer tipped his hat. Looks like you handled that pretty well. I gave him a half smile. Thanks for backing me up. The female officer glanced at the dogs, then back at me. Gotta say, that's an effective security system, I chuckled. They're better than any alarm, she nodded. Well, let us know if they try this again. Something tells me that woman isn't going to let it go. I sighed, already expecting another Karen-sized headache in the future. I'll be ready. The officers got back into their vehicles and drove off, leaving me alone with my land once again. I took a deep breath, finally letting my shoulders relax. The quiet had returned, and with it, a deep sense of satisfaction. I turned to my dogs, who were now sitting attentively, their eyes still scanning the area. Good job, guys. Titan wagged his tail. Shadow gave me a quick nuzzle before trotting off to patrol the property again. I picked up my coffee, now cold, but I didn't care. I had one. My land was mine again, and Karen, well, she had just learned a very important lesson about messing with the wrong neighbor. But if I thought this was over, I was very, very wrong, because the next morning something showed up in my mailbox, and that's when I realized Karen wasn't done yet. If I thought Karen was going to take the loss and move on, I was dead wrong. The next morning, I stepped outside to get my mail, still enjoying the peace and quiet my land was supposed to have. But the moment I opened my mailbox, my stomach dropped. There, sitting on top of the usual junk mail, was a thick envelope stamped with the official county seal. I tore it open and scanned the letter inside. A formal complaint had been filed against me. It accused me of operating an unlicensed event space, creating an environmental hazard with dangerous animals, failing to comply with community safety regulations, and at the bottom, a lovely note stating that the county would be sending an inspector to evaluate my property in 3 days. I let out a short, humorless laugh. So this was Karen's next move. I could already picture her, sitting at her pristine little desk, cackling as she imagined me scrambling to shut down my imaginary event space. She thought she had backed me into a corner. She thought she had won. She had no idea what was coming. That afternoon, I made a few phone calls. First to my lawyer, second to the local police chief who already knew about Karen's trespassing stunt, and finally to an old friend of mine, Mason, a county official who had zero patience for HOA nonsense. When I told him what was happening, he actually laughed. "She's really trying this," Mason said. "You have all the documentation, right?" "Every bit of it," I confirmed. "Property records, deeds, security footage from the trespassing incident. She has nothing." "Good," he said. "Because that means I get to be the one to shut her down." I could practically hear the grin in his voice. "Let her think she won. I'll handle the inspection personally." That was all I needed to hear. Karen had just dug her own grave. The day of the inspection, I saw her. She had parked her SUV at the end of my driveway, arms crossed, smug as ever. She thought she was about to watch my downfall. But when the county vehicle pulled up, her expression changed fast. Mason stepped out, wearing his usual no-nonsense look. He adjusted his sunglasses, gave me a nod, and then turned to Karen. "Miss Foster," he greeted, his voice dripping with mock politeness. "I understand you're the one who filed this complaint," Karen beamed. "Yes, this man is running a completely unregulated event space. And he has dangerous animals on site. This land is a public hazard." Mason nodded slowly, then turned to me. "Mind if I take a look around? Be my guest," I said, grinning. I led him around my property, showing him everything. No illegal gatherings, no safety hazards, no violations. Just my land, my house, and my dogs, who watched curiously as Mason jotted down a few notes. After about 10 minutes, he turned back to Karen. Well, he said, this land is privately owned and properly maintained. There are 0 violations. Karen's smug smile vanished. What? She sputtered. That can't be right. His dogs are dangerous. They almost attacked innocent families. Mason turned to me. Do you have proof that your dogs are trained? I handed him a folder. Inside were official certifications, vet records, and documents proving my dogs were trained security animals, not aggressive threats. Mason flipped through them and nodded. That settles it, he said, looking back at Karen. This complaint is baseless. Karen's face twisted with rage. But he can't just get away with this, Mason raised an eyebrow. Get away with what? Owning private property. Following the law, Karen opened and closed her mouth, grasping for an argument that didn't exist. But then she made her final mistake. Well, I suppose the county won't mind if the homeowners association takes legal action, she huffed. Our board has already started drafting a lawsuit. Mason blinked. A lawsuit, he repeated. Using HOA funds, Karen froze. Suddenly, she realized she had just confessed to something very, very illegal. Mason's lips curled into a predatory smirk. Miss Foster, are you telling me you used HOA dues to file a personal lawsuit against a non-member? Karen went ghost white. Well, I mean, it's for the good of the neighborhood. Mason's smirk widened. Interesting, because that sounds like embezzlement, Karen sputtered. It's not, it's just, Mason pulled out his phone. Sounds like I need to have a chat with the county auditor. And maybe a few HOA members. I'm sure they'd love to know how their money is being spent. Karen looked like she was about to pass out. This is harassment, she screeched. You can't do this to me. Mason cut her off. No, ma'am, you did this to yourself. Asterisk, then he turned back to me, completely ignoring her now. I'll be filing this report today. No violations. And if she keeps this up, you might want to consider a defamation lawsuit, Karen gasped. He can't sue me. Mason didn't even look at her. Good day, Miss Foster. With that, he got back into his car and drove away. Karen stood there, shaking with rage. Then slowly she turned to me. Her entire body trembled. Her hands curled into fists. This isn't over, she hissed. I just smiled. Oh, Karen, I said, chuckling. It already is. But what I didn't know was that Karen was about to take things even further. Because if she couldn't win legally, she was about to try something even more insane. And this time, she was going to regret it more than ever. If Karen had any common sense, she would have taken her massive loss and moved on. But Karen wasn't wired that way. She wasn't just embarrassed, she was furious. And when people like Karen get desperate, they get dangerous. It was 2 nights after Mason shut her down. I was sitting on my porch enjoying the peace, watching the stars with a cold beer in hand. My dogs lay nearby, calm but alert. Titan, my Belgian Malinois, perked up first. His ears twitched. Shadow, my black German shepherd, lifted her head, sniffing the air. Something was off. Then I heard it, a soft rustling in the trees. At first I thought it was just the wind. Then, crack, a twig snapped. Someone was on my property. I set my beer down and stood up slowly, listening. The rustling got closer. Then the sound of footsteps, multiple footsteps. I didn't need to guess who it was. Karen had just made her final mistake. I slipped inside, grabbed my rifle from its secured case and turned on the security cameras. And there they were, 4 people dressed in dark clothing, trying and failing to sneak across my land. 2 men, 1 woman. And at the front, Karen. She was holding bolt cutters. You have got to be kidding me, I muttered. I hit record on the security system and grabbed my phone. 1 call, Sheriff Duncan. He answered after 2 rings. Duncan here. Hey, Sheriff, I said, keeping my voice calm. Got a situation. Trespassers on my land. Karen. Oh yeah. And she brought friends. A pause. Armed? Duncan asked. I zoomed in on the camera feed. One of the men had something in his waistband. Probably not a phone. Maybe. Duncan cursed. We're on our way. I hung up. Now I just had to buy some time. I stepped back onto the porch, rifle in hand. My dogs were locked in, staring into the trees. I whistled once. Titan stood up. Shadow followed. The rest of the pack shifted, ready. Then I turned on the floodlights. A blinding white beam lit up the yard. And there they were, caught red-handed. Karen flinched, dropping the bolt cutters. The 2 men stumbled back, shading their eyes. I stepped forward, rifle lowered but visible. You lost, I called out. Karen's face turned red. You can't do this, I raised an eyebrow. Do what? Stand on my own land, she huffed. We were just checking the property lines. "You're violating county regulations," I barked out a laugh. "By sitting on my porch at midnight." One of the men, ***, a big guy, bald, wearing a hoodie, ***, muttered something to Karen. She ignored him. She pointed at me, shaking with rage. "You ruined my reputation. You humiliated me. You know what people are saying about me now?" I smirked. "Oh, I can guess." The second guy, skinnier, nervous, took a step back. "Karen," he muttered, "this was a bad idea." "No," she snapped. "He needs to pay." And then she made her final mistake. She stepped forward, right into my dog's territory. Before she could take another step, Titan let out a low, deep growl, a sound that made the hairs on my neck stand up. Karen froze. Her friends, they panicked. The big guy took a step back. The nervous guy turned and bolted. Karen wasn't so smart. She jabbed a finger at Titan, shaking with fury. "You wouldn't dare." Titan took one step forward. Shadow moved to his side, ears pricked, eyes locked. "Karen," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I'd stop talking if I were you." She hesitated. But then, the big guy snapped. "This is insane, I'm out," he hissed. He took off running after his friend, and that's when Karen finally lost it. "You cowards," she screeched. "He can't do anything. He's just—" Then she saw the red and blue lights, her face drained of color. Sheriff Duncan pulled up fast. 3 squad cars, 6 deputies, guns drawn. Karen whipped around. "Officers, arrest him. He's got dangerous animals. He's threatening me." Duncan ignored her. He looked at me. "You okay?" I nodded. "Caught them on camera, trespassing. Attempting property damage." Karen's mouth dropped open. "No, that's not true." One of the deputies grabbed her by the arm. "Karen Foster, you are under arrest for criminal trespassing and attempted destruction of property." She screamed. "You can't do this to me. I was trying to protect the community." Duncan rolled his eyes. "Read her rights." Karen's voice cracked as they cuffed her 2 friends, already sitting in the back of the other squad cars. She struggled, kicking at the ground. "This isn't over. I own this neighborhood. I will make sure you suffer for this." I smirked. "You'll be suffering first." The deputies shoved her into the car, and just like that, Karen was gone. I let out a breath, watching the squad cars disappear down the road. Duncan walked up, shaking his head. "I gotta say, Evans, you really bring out the worst in people." I laughed. "I don't try to, it just happens." Duncan snorted. "Well, she's looking at felony charges, probably jail time." "Good," I said. "Maybe now she'll finally learn." Duncan chuckled. "Doubt it, but at least she's your problem now." I smirked. "Not anymore." Duncan tipped his hat. "Call me if you need anything else." And with that, he was gone. The night was quiet again, and Karen finally out of my life. At least, that's what I thought. But Karen had one last trick up her sleeve. And when I found out what it was, even I couldn't believe it. I thought it was over. Karen had been arrested. Her so-called friends had turned on her. And Sheriff Duncan assured me she was looking at real jail time. But people like Karen, they don't just go quietly. And when I found out what she did next, even I was shocked. It had been a week since her arrest. I was finally relaxing again, enjoying my land without some HOA lunatic trying to take it over. The dogs were back to their usual routines. Titan and Shadow would do their perimeter checks. The others would roam around the house. Everything felt normal again, until a letter arrived. Not from Karen, from a lawyer. At first, I thought maybe it was a court notice about Karen's charges. But when I opened it, I actually laughed. Karen was suing me for emotional distress. She claimed I had traumatized her by using dangerous animals to threaten her and her guests. And get this, she was demanding $100,000 in damages for pain and suffering. Unbelievable. I grabbed my phone and called Sheriff Duncan. "Duncan here. You're not gonna believe this," I said, chuckling. "Oh, I'll believe it. What now?" Karen's suing me. A long pause. Then Duncan burst out laughing. "Of course she is. What's she claiming? That you gave her a headache, pretty much," I said. "Emotional distress." 100 grand, Duncan sighed. "She's desperate. She knows she's screwed." I leaned back in my chair. "Think she has a chance?" he snorted. "Not a snowball's chance in hell." "Good," I said, "because I'm about to make sure this blows up in her face." The next morning, I called my lawyer, Mason. Same guy who shut Karen down when she tried to take my land. I told him about the lawsuit. He laughed harder than Duncan. "She really doesn't know when to quit, does she?" "Nope." "All right," he said. "I'll handle it, but just to be clear, we're countersuing." That got my attention. "For what?" Mason's voice turned sharp. "She trespassed, tried to damage your property, and got herself arrested for it." Now she's filing a frivolous lawsuit just to waste your time, I grinned. I like the way you think. 2 weeks later, we were in court. Karen showed up looking pathetic. Her hair was a mess, she had bags under her eyes, and she was alone. Her friends had abandoned her, her lawyer. Some cheap HOA attorney who clearly didn't even believe her case. The judge read through her complaint, visibly unimpressed. Then he looked at me. "Mr. Evans, your response?" I stood up. "My dogs never harmed anyone," I said. "They were on my land doing their job." I placed a folder on the table. "This is the police report from the night of the incident. This is security footage showing Karen trespassing. And this," I slid another document forward. "This is our counter lawsuit for damages related to her trespassing and harassment." Karen's face drained of color. She leaned toward her lawyer, whispering frantically. The judge skimmed through the documents. Then he sighed. "Miss Foster," he said, rubbing his temples. "You don't have a case." Karen flinched. He continued, "Your claims are frivolous. The evidence against you is overwhelming. Not only is this lawsuit dismissed, but you are now facing legal consequences for trespassing and falsifying a complaint." Karen gasped. "That's not fair. He set me up." The judge gave her a cold stare. "You're lucky you're not facing more charges." And then, the best part. As for damages, Mr. Evans is awarded $50,000 for legal fees and property interference. Karen screamed. She stormed out of the courtroom. Her lawyer didn't even bother following her. I walked out calmly, feeling satisfied. $50,000, not bad. But Karen wasn't just broke now. She was completely ruined. After that, Karen disappeared. She sold her house at a huge loss. Rumors spread that she had moved in with a relative. Some people said she was trying to start over in another state. Me, I didn't care. Karen had finally learned her lesson. And my land still mine, still peaceful. Exactly the way it should be. That night, I sat on my porch, watching the sun set over my land. Titan lay at my feet, tail flicking lazily. Shadow trotted over, nuzzling my hand. I looked out over the quiet fields, the trees swaying gently in the wind. No HOA, no Karen, just me, my dogs, and my land, and that was the sweetest victory of all. Have you ever dealt with a crazy HOA? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe for more wild stories. See you next time.